Hey everyone, my name's Calvin and welcome to my video tutorial here. In this video I'm going to show you how to paint this underwater watercolor scene in Procreate. And I think it's a pretty simple process, and I think you'll be able to use some of these techniques for any kind of illustration like this. So I'm going to start out with a new blank watercolor texture paper, and I'll use the regular brushes as well as these other brushes that I'm going to give you guys for free, the shoal brushes, and I'll put a link to those in the description. So I'm going to start off with the abstract round brush, and I'm going to choose a sort of medium powdery blue color. I don't want it to be too green, but that's up to you. And I'm going to use it at the largest size, and I'm just going to create a kind of big oval shape. I really like the kind of handmade, kind of wobbly circle shapes like this. And I'm doing some variation in pressure there just so I get some different levels of darkness in there. And I'll use the water blender to just smooth this out a bit. Okay, that looks pretty good. I want this to sort of fade as this is going to be the top, that's the bottom, and I want it to get darker as it goes down. So what I'll do is I'll use the freehand selection tool, and I'll just make this kind of half moon shaped selection like this. And then I'll feather that out quite a bit, and I'll go to my hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll darken it a little bit. I'll shift the hue a little bit more towards purple, but just a tiny bit, and then I'll increase the saturation. And I'm actually going to do that one more time, but a little bit lower this time, just catching the bottom edge there. I'll feather that one out. Same thing, I'll just lower the brightness, raise the saturation, and maybe shift the hue just a tiny bit towards purple. And now for the top, I want to add this effect where it looks like light is kind of filtering through. So first I'll draw a circle like this, and I'll feather that out. And then I'll hue, saturation, and brightness, and just raise the brightness. Shift it a little bit towards green. So before I was shifting it towards purple. Now towards the top I'm shifting it towards green as we get closer to the surface. I won't mess with the saturation. Now I'm going to add this kind of, I guess like a wavy reflection effect. So I'll use that selection tool and I'll just make these kind of series of these sort of half moon shaped selections like this. Maybe 3 or 4 of those. And then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And just raise the brightness a little bit like that, just so I can barely see it. I have these kind of colored lighter bands kind of at the top. So next I'm going to do the ground, the ocean floor here. So I'll use that freehand selection tool, and I'll make a selection just covering like that area, and then I'll darken this just to make it stand off, and I'll lower the saturation a little bit, and I'll do the same thing over here. Whoops, I need to grab that selection tool. I'll do the same thing over here, and I'll just carefully follow that edge like that. And I'll darken this one too, but a little bit less, so I still have some contrast. There we go. And what I want to do next is I'm going to use that shoal brush I mentioned. So there'll be a link to these in the description, and they're basically like fish. So when you make a brush stroke and it will just make a bunch of fish. So let me make a new layer, and I'll grab the shoal brush number 1, and I'm going to use kind of a darker blue color. Now if I just use this brush like this, you can see it's going over the edge, which is fine because you can go back and erase that. But what I want to do is, first I'll just select the area where I want the fish to be. That way I don't have to clean it up later on. So then I'll grab that brush and I'll just do some random kind of lines of fish like this, just to add some interesting stuff going on in the background there. And in a few areas it did go over the edge, so I will kind of zoom in there and kind of clean this up a little bit. And since I did this on a different layer, I'm going to change that to multiply, lower the opacity to pretty much 0, and then just slowly raise it up until I just have those fish kind of in the background just very subtly. And next I want to add the very, very close foreground. So I'll go back to my background layer, and using that selection tool, I want this scene to be sort of framed in with sort of coral on both sides. So what I'll do is I'll make a really jagged selection like this, just imagining sort of the edges of 2 kind of pillars of coral, just like that. So there and there. And then I'll go to my hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'll really darken those, but I'm also going to desaturate them quite a bit as well. And that just sort of gives this scene something kind of holding it in on the edges. And if you see your background sort of affecting the coral, because this is all on one layer, you can just grab the selection tool or the blending tool, the water blender, pretty small, and just sort of break up that hard edge, just to sort of mix it up a bit. So I've got the basics of the background scene finished here. Now I want to add in some really simple seaweed and coral. So I'm going to make yet another layer here, all the way on top of everything. And I'll do it with light colors first. So I'll pick a pretty light, almost white color, and I'm going to grab the fine liner pen and add a kind of medium size, maybe 15%. I'm just going to do some sort of seaweed patterns like this. But keep in mind that I am bringing it down to the bottom of the scene on purpose. I don't know why, but it always looks weird to me when the seaweed kind of ends like that. There's a kind of loss of perspective. So when I draw my seaweed, I'm making sure it goes all the way to the bottom of the frame. And for this one, I'll just do those two. And I'll just quickly add some little leaf details on these. And I'm going to do some darker coral as well. So I'll choose almost black, kind of blue color, just something that'll kind of stand off, maybe the same color as that coral. And I'll just add some sort of different species of coral down here like this. And I think it's important not to get too carried away. I'm just going to add maybe in total like 5 different kinds of coral. There we go. I think that's good enough. And this scene could be done, but if you're feeling ambitious, I want to show you how to paint a manta ray. It's so easy to do. So just to keep everything organized, I'm going to go ahead and merge everything else onto one layer, just like that. And I'll do a layer on top of all this for the manta ray, and I'll zoom in here. And for the manta ray, I'm just going to choose a pretty dark blue color. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to choose the fine liner pen brush for this. And about the same size I actually used to do the coral. What I'll do is first, I'm going to draw a triangle like this. And then at the bottom of the triangle, I'm going to draw a really shallow semicircle like that. And then towards the back here, I'm going to do a little fin, 2 little fins like that. And then I'll do the sort of spear tail like that. And now I'll just go ahead and fill this in. So there we go. And once I've got this filled in, I can zoom in here and grab that freehand selection tool. And I'm just going to make this, maybe this is the hardest part. I'm going to make a selection that just follows the edge of that fin, just around here like this. And as soon as it gets to this point, it sort of follows that upper triangle and then curves down just like that. Then I'll join the selection. I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness. And if I raise the brightness, it sort of just gives this that dimension, that second fin, just by highlighting it. I think I'll lower the saturation a bit. And that's just an easy way to paint a manta ray. I do want to add some dots on it, so let me choose a pretty sort of medium light color there. Same brush, fine liner pen, and we'll just see how that looks. I think that's pretty good. I just want to add some texture to it, so maybe at a smaller size, and I'll just go through and do a bunch of dots on this. And I did end up going back over it in a lighter shade of dots, just so I have that kind of two-tone dot pattern. And one of the great things about Procreate is if you feel like what you've painted, maybe it's like has the wrong proportions, you can just go to that selection tool and set it to warp. And this will let you kind of stretch out your drawing. And you might be able to find a kind of better arrangement here that looks a little bit more like what you wanted. There we go. I think that's pretty good. And let's zoom out here. And there we go. That's how I'd sort of lay out and paint a really simple underwater scene. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, I'd love to hear about them. But other than that, guys, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.